Welcome to Episode 3 of Rise of a Nation, South America. This episode is on Guyana.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading to the northern coast of South America, to Guyana. A fascinating place. It's bordered by the Atlantic, Brazil, Venezuela, and Suriname, once part of the British West Indies.
That's right. And it's surprisingly small, actually. The third smallest sovereign state on the mainland.
Right, and second least populous, but incredibly rich in biodiversity, isn't it? With rainforests, part of the Amazon even.
Absolutely. Pristine habitat, especially in the Guyana Shield region. English is the official language, but you hear a lot of indigenous languages too.
So our goal today is to really unpack Guyana's story chronologically, from those early Dutch colonial times right up to the present day.
Yeah, looking at all the forces that shaped it. Colonialism, slavery, independence, ethnic diversity, and now oil. A lot to cover.
Okay, let's dive right in. The Dutch, they arrived pretty early, 17th century.
Exactly, 1621. The Dutch West India Company took control of the Essequibo trading post. They ran it for, well, over 170 years.
Just that one area initially.
Well, then came Berbice, a second colony, in 1627. That was governed separately.
Okay.
And then Demerara settled in 1741. It eventually became its own separate colony, too, in 1773, directly under the company.
So the Dutch were first drawn there by trade opportunities in the Caribbean, I assume.
That was the initial idea, yes,
Yeah.
Caribbean trade. But they quickly saw the agricultural potential.
Ah, the land itself.
Immense potential. They were exporting tobacco from Essequibo as early as 1623. But soon, the big crops became coffee, sugar, and cotton, mainly for the Dutch market.
Right. And growing those crops, especially sugar on plantations, that requires a massive amount of labor.
A huge amount. And the indigenous populations, well, they weren't suited for that kind of intense plantation work. Plus, they were devastated by European diseases.
And there was conflict, too.
Yes, conflict with the early Dutch settlers as well.
So facing this labor shortage, the Dutch West India Company turned to the transatlantic slave trade, forcibly importing Africans.
It's a story we see repeated, tragically, across the Americas. The human cost must have been immense, unimaginable. The historical records describe just brutal conditions, extremely high death rates, and, of course, constant resistance, frequent rebellions.
I read about extreme punishments.
Yes, one source details horrific things like amputations, severe mutilations, often done arbitrarily without any real process, just sheer cruelty.
And even involving indigenous people in capturing runaways.
They were sometimes paid to capture and return those who tried to escape enslavement. A truly grim practice.
The contrast between the lives of the colonists and the enslaved.
Stark. A massive gulf. Estimates suggest the enslaved outnumbered Europeans maybe 11 to 1.
11 to 1.
And while not everyone worked directly in the cane fields, many were forced into service just to maintain the extravagant lifestyles of the Dutch elite. Some accounts call it depraved.
And the Essequibo River was central to all this, wasn't it? Geographically and economically.
Absolutely pivotal. The riverbanks were incredibly fertile, some of the richest farmland known then. Yeah, a map from 1796 shows just how densely packed the sugar plantations were along the river.
Yeah.
Historical treaties actually value that land as highly as prime areas in West Africa or even parts of India, like Madras. Shows its economic importance.
And the Dutch ran things from Fort Island.
That's right, Fort Island in the Essequibo River. That was their capital. Fort Zeelandia was the main structure there.
Built by
enslaved Africans. Interestingly, its design seems inspired by West African coastal forts, reflecting those Dutch networks. One historian called it the heart of a colony of cruelty.
But resistance continued. Tell us about the Berbice slave uprising.
A really crucial moment, February 1763. Enslaved people on plantations along the Kanji River in Berbice rose up.
Led by coffee. More coffee.
Now a national hero in Guyana, and rightly so. They organized a powerful force, destroying plantations, confronting the colonists. It genuinely threatened European control in the region.
Did they succeed?
They had initial successes, but ultimately, the rebellion was suppressed. It took combined forces. British and French troops had to come help the Dutch put it down.
Wow. Even so, a powerful act of defiance.
Absolutely. A testament to the fight for freedom, even though it failed in the short term.
So despite the cruelty and the eventual end of their rule, the Dutch left a physical mark.
Oh, definitely. Their engineering skills are still visible. That impressive seawall along the coast, that's Dutch hydraulic expertise, vital for that low-lying land.
And the polders, the reclaimed land for farming.
Exactly. Polder agriculture. And you still find Dutch place names along the coast, like Rotterdam, Mary, Haarlem. echoes of their presence.
Okay, so then things shift. Early 19th century, the British arrive.
Yes, during the Napoleonic Wars. That period of upheaval in Europe saw the colonies fall under British control.
And it became official.
It was formalized in 1814 at the London Convention. The territories were officially ceded to Great Britain.
And this immediately brought up the border issue with Venezuela, didn't it?
Straight away. Britain inherited the Dutch-claimed territory west up to the Essequibo River. But Venezuela, based on older Spanish claims, insisted their territory went east to the Essequibo.
So that dispute, which we still hear about today, really has roots way back in this handover.
Precisely. The seeds were sown right then.
And the British consolidated these separate colonies.
They did. In 1831, they unified Berbice and the United Colony of Demerara and Essequibo into one entity, British Guiana. A new phase of colonial rule began.
Which meant dealing with the institution of slavery they inherited.
Exactly. Now, the international slave trade had been abolished by Britain in 1807, but slavery itself continued within the colonies.
Right, so the exploitation continued.
It did, and so did the resistance. The Demerara Rebellion of 1823 was huge. Maybe 10,000 to 13,000 enslaved people rose up across Demerara Essequibo.
That must have shaken the foundations.
It did. Although it was violently crushed, it was a major factor pushing towards full abolition across the British Empire.
And full emancipation finally came in 1838, a monumental step. But what happened next for the formerly enslaved people?
Well, it was freedom, but freedom brought new challenges. A major consequence was a mass exodus from the plantations. Many just refused to keep working in those same conditions.
Understandably. Where did they go?
Some moved to towns, but many pooled their resources, bought abandoned estates, and started their own Afro-Guyanese village communities.
Becoming independent farmers.
Exactly. Growing food, selling produce. The emergence of this independent peasantry started to challenge the planters' absolute power. A subtle shift, but significant.
So the planters lost their captive workforce. How did they respond? They still needed labor.
Their response was the system of indentured labor, a new form of controlled labor.
Where did these laborers come from?
Primarily from India. Large numbers from North India, the Bhojpur and Awadh regions, also many from South India, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and smaller groups came from China and Portugal too.
And the conditions for these indentured workers, was it really freedom?
Often described as a new slavery. Technically not chattel slavery, but the conditions were incredibly harsh. Limited freedom, coercion, exploitation. Very grim.
And this drastically changed Guyana's demographics, didn't it?
Fundamentally, the arrival of so many Indo-Guyanese plus the Chinese communities created the multi-ethnic society Guyana is today. If you look at the 2012 census, it's mainly Indian, African, and multiracial people than indigenous, European, and Chinese groups.
Did indentured labor just fade away?
It ended formally in 1917. World War I was a key factor. Britain grew concerned about political stability back in India, and Indian nationalists were increasingly criticizing the system as exploitative.
And around this time, workers started organizing.
Yes, early trade unions began to form, like the British Guiana Labor Union, the BGLU, in 1917. Initially focused on Afro-Guyanese dock workers, but later broadening its scope. And the British Guiana Workers' League came along in 1931, aiming to improve conditions for all ethnicities under forced or indentured labor.
Okay, so moving into the 20th century, the push for more political voice grows stronger.
Absolutely. You saw demands for representation emerge back in the 19th century, mostly from the new Afro-Guyanese middle class.
Were there reforms?
Some limited constitutional changes in 1891, but the planters kept most of the power. A big moment was the Moyne Commission report in 1938.
What did that find?
It really highlighted the growing ethnic divide between Afro and Indo-Guyanese. It called for more democracy, social reforms, better living conditions. But then World War II broke out, delaying implementation.
Did the war itself affect politics in British Guiana?
It did, actually. The political system widened a bit. The economy got a boost from demand for bauxite. The first 10-year development plan was created, and more legislative seats became elective.
And key political figures started emerging.
Yes, this is when Chetty Jagan and Forbes Burnham really rise to prominence. The Political Affairs Committee, or PATES, formed in 1946, promoting Marxist ideas.
And that led to the main political parties.
It laid the groundwork for the People's Progressive Party, PPP, and the People's National Congress, PNC. But unfortunately, these parties became heavily associated with ethnic groups.
How so?
The PPP drew most of its support from the Indo-Guyanese community, while the PNC was largely supported by Afro-Guyanese. It's often called Apanjat politics, voting based on your ethnic group.
That sounds like a recipe for division. And there was a major crisis in the 50s.
A huge one. 1953, the PPP won the election, and Jagan became chief minister. They introduced the Labor Relations Act.
What was controversial about that?
The opposition, and crucially the British, saw it as an attempt by the PPP to control the unions, favoring one union linked to the party. The British saw it as a challenge to their authority.
How did Britain react?
Swiftly and strongly. They sent in troops and suspended the Constitution. Jagan was out of office after just 133 days.
That points to significant outside influence on Guyana's path.
Absolutely critical. There's strong evidence and allegations of British and also U.S., specifically CIA, interference in Guyanese politics around this time.
Why? What was the goal?
The main goal seems to have been preventing Chetty Jagan, seen as a Marxist, from gaining or holding power during the Cold War.
And how did they allegedly try to achieve that?
A key reported strategy was to deliberately stir up and worsen racial tensions between Indo and Afro-Guyanese, to split Jagan's potential multiracial support.
That's incredibly cynical, and it sounds like it had lasting effects.
Tragically, yes. The 1964 elections were heavily marked by ethnic voting. The PNC, under Burnham, formed a coalition with the more conservative United Force, UF.
Specifically to block Jagan.
Exactly. Even though the PPP won the most votes as a single party, the PNC-UF coalition took power. Jagan and the PPP claimed the election was rigged.
And amidst all this tension, independence finally arrives.
Yes, May 26, 1966. Guyana became independent under that PNC-UF coalition government, with Forbes Burnham as the first prime minister. The U.S. recognized it immediately, established an embassy, a new chapter began.
But independence didn't magically heal those ethnic divisions, did it?
Sadly, no. If anything, post-independence politics became even more defined by them. The PPP and PNC were seen as representing Indo and Afro-Guyanese interests, respectively.
Leading to clashes.
Yes, lots of polarization, tension, especially over things like government jobs and resource allocation. National unity was really hampered, and Burnham's rule became increasingly authoritarian over time.
And then came Jonestown in the late 70s. A horrific event.
Truly horrific. 1978, Jim Jones moved his People's Temple followers from the U.S. to this remote settlement in Guyana.
And it ended in mass suicide? Or murder-suicide?
That's murder-suicide.
Over 900 people died. It brought incredibly negative international attention onto Burnham's government, partly because of alleged links between officials and the temple.
It took quite a while, but Guyana eventually moved towards more democratic elections.
Yes, in 1992, there were elections widely seen as free and fair. Chetty Jagan and the PPP won, breaking the long period of PNC or Afro-Guyanese political dominance.
Was that a smooth transition? Not entirely. Even that landmark election saw some violence, highlighting the persistent underlying tensions, and instability continued. There was more violence around the 1997 elections, for example.
And politics remained quite volatile even more recently.
Very much so. The 2020 elections were incredibly contentious, a long, bitter dispute over the results.
Who eventually took power?
Irfan Ali of the PPP Civic Coalition was sworn in as president, but only after a real standoff amid widespread claims of fraud from the other side. Writers like Gao Trabahudur have pointed out the deep racial undertones in these recent events.
Which brings us closer to the present day and the massive development, oil.
The game changer. ExxonMobil started making huge offshore discoveries around 2015. Though, interestingly, a prospecting license was secretly given to Esso, including Exxon, way back in 1999.
And the scale is enormous.
Massive. Estimates are over 10 billion barrels recoverable. It's turned Guyana into a major new oil producer. As of late 2024, it was apparently the world's third largest per capita oil producer. That's staggering.
The economic forecast must have been astronomical.
They were. The IMF predicted something like 53% growth in 2020 when the first big project started. The actual figure was around 43%, still huge. Understandably, oil revenue and development are now a major focus for the government.
But that creates a tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Given Guyana's image as a green country with vast rainforests.
A huge tension. Guyana has historically been a champion for conservation, a massive carbon sink. So there's a big debate now. How does large-scale oil production fit with its low-carbon development strategy?
What's the government's argument?
They argue the oil money is crucial for development and, ironically, for climate adaptation, specifically building sea defenses for the vulnerable coast. Meanwhile, ExxonMobil reportedly sees Guyana as key to its long-term forever oil strategy.
And on all this oil wealth has also refocused attention on the border dispute with Venezuela, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Venezuela has really ramped up its historical claim to the Essequibo territory, which is where a lot of the resources are.
Despite an old ruling.
Right. Despite an 1899 international tribunal ruling largely in favor of Britain and thus Guyana, Venezuela never fully accepted it. The 1966 Geneva Treaty was meant to find a solution, but tensions flared up massively after Venezuela's 2023 referendum supporting annexation.
Where does that stand now?
The International Court of Justice has stepped in, ordering Venezuela not to take unilateral action. But it's still very tense. Venezuelan maps still show Essequibo as a zone in reclamation.
Amidst these big external issues, Guyana is still active internationally.
Oh, yes. Member of CARICOM, the Commonwealth, UNASUR, OAS, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's even served multiple times on the UN Security Council.
And internally, what are the main challenges, besides the ethnic tensions we've discussed?
Well, managing the oil wealth fairly is a big one. Avoiding the resource curse and ensuring benefits are widespread. Diversifying the economy beyond oil-boosting agriculture, tourism, renewables. Tackling crime and domestic violence. Strengthening institutions like the judiciary and the electoral system.
Are there specific government efforts to address these?
Yes. The government talks about building one Guyana, investing in education, healthcare, infrastructure, social programs. There are initiatives for gender equality, youth training,
and environmental initiatives alongside the oil.
They're still pursuing the low-carbon development strategy, engaging in carbon credit markets. There's a deal with Hess Corporation, for example, where some revenue goes to Amerindian villages.
Are there concerns about how the oil money is managed?
Yes. There are ongoing calls for more transparency and better governance of the National Resource Fund, where the oil revenues go. And issues around the Amerindian Act and land rights remain crucial, ensuring proper consultation with indigenous communities about resource projects.
It's certainly a complex picture, a history shaped by colonialism, migration, struggle, ethnic divides, and now this potentially transformative oil boom.
It really is a nation at a crossroads, trying to balance this incredible economic opportunity from oil with its vital natural heritage and the deep need for social cohesion and equity among all its diverse peoples.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the question really lingers, doesn't it? How will Guyana manage this future? Can it use the oil wealth to benefit everyone, protect its environment, and build a truly unified nation?
And what lessons might its journey hold for other countries facing similar transitions? These are huge questions for Guyana and perhaps for all of us watching. Definitely something to keep thinking about.
Thank you for watching Episode 3 of Rise of a Nation South America. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe for more. Write in the comments what country's rise you would like me to cover next.